And we're live. Oh, now we're live. And we're live. All right. Hi, and welcome to this event for the amazing cookbook, Root and Nourish. I am Carter. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the event coordinator here at Astoria Bookshop. Before we get started, I wanted to go through just a few housekeeping things. You will have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the cooking portion, but especially the last 10, 15 minutes of this. If you have any questions throughout, put them in the chat and I will mark them to be answered either in the Q&A portion or during the cooking portion, depending on where they fit. You can chat with one another in that chat box over on the right. You should see it over there. I think every single time I do this, I'm unsure if I'm mirrored, so it should be over there. When you're chatting, though, note that we will kick you out if you participate in any trolling or any racial, ethnic, or homophobic slurs. I'm just asking you all to be nice to each other in the chat, but also to be supportive of our authors. Say, hey, you're doing a great job. Hey, that looks really good what you're cooking right now. Hey, I also like that food. Things like that. Just be kind, be respectful, and say nice things. Finally, there is a button right there at the bottom that offers the option to buy a copy of the book. It is available in our shop right now. So we would, if you don't live near Astoria, or if you do, you can come and pick it up tomorrow, or we can ship it out to you tomorrow. Now, let's get things started, and I'll introduce our fantastic guests while everyone at home, if you are cooking along, you can pull together your ingredients. And we'll get started. So Jennifer Kurdyla, who uses she, her pronouns, is an Ayurvedic health counselor, yoga teacher, and writer. Plant-based since 2008, she learned to love food by experimenting with vegan and Ayurvedic cooking in her tiny New York kitchens. She is the co-author of Root and Nourish, an herbal cookbook for women's wellness, and lives in Brooklyn, New York. Read more about her wellness services and educational resources at www.benourished.me and on Instagram at Jennifer Kurdyla. Abbey Rodriguez, who uses she, her pronouns, is a certified holistic nutritionist, herbalist, and food content creator. Over the last 5 years, she has been developing recipes for women and young families on her food and wellness blog, The Butter Half, which is a great name. She is deeply passionate about the power of plants and nutrition and teaching others about holistic wellness. She lives in Northern Virginia with her husband and 3 children. Visit her online at thebutterhalf.com and on Instagram at thebutterhalf_. So welcome our fantastic guests. Before I disappear off screen, I just want to pose one quick question for you two. How did you get started doing this and deciding to make this cookbook?
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Carter, and for the Astoria Bookshop for hosting us. We are so excited to be here and to be with all of you. As you heard, I am a local to Brooklyn, to New York, very close, but not easy to get to on public transportation to the shop. And Abbey is down in DC and has made many a wonderful trip up to the city. So we're all experiencing a little bit of gray, sort of yucky weather this today, but also the last couple of weeks, which is unfortunate for summer, but also makes it a fun time to be in your kitchen and experiment with some summer things. So today we have a lot of fun things in store for you in terms of our recipes. Our book is rooted in Western herbalism and Ayurveda, and thinking about ways to incorporate herbs and spices and all of the wonderful plant foods that nature provides into our daily lives, so that cooking well for your health, but also cooking well for the environment becomes more of a norm for more of us, and how we can sort of connect to the natural rhythms of the world and nature itself for individual and collective healing. So we're going to dive into that a little bit today with some really tasty recipes that are great for summer. But before we get into that, to answer Carter's question, we are going to just talk a little bit about the book and how we got together and what you can expect from Root and Nourish if you haven't already checked it out. I'm just saying hello back to all the folks who are chiming in on the chat as well. So Abby, let's dive into our little story, which is one of our favorite things to tell about this book, besides about even the content. So I began my career in publishing, and I was an editor working at a large trade publishing house in New York and looking for some content. And I came across Abby's website, The Butter Half. Well, it was in 2015, right? It was some time ago. And promptly emailed her and begged her to write a cookbook. And Abby was still sort of in the developmental stage of the website, and wasn't quite ready for a book, but we stayed in touch. And her recipes at the time were really family friendly and gorgeously photographed, as she has developed that wonderful skill and put it on display in Root and Nourish for us. And we stayed in touch, and in the meantime, she developed this incredible food blogger conference called the Tastemaker Conference. So if any of you are food bloggers or food content creators or interested in sort of diving into more of that route, you should definitely check out Tastemaker Conference. And Abby, maybe you could share some of the resources on that for folks if they're interested. But we connected there. I presented about how to develop a blog into a book at the inaugural conference in Salt Lake City a few years ago. And when I eventually left my position in publishing, I was at the time really taking a pivot and investing more of my time in holistic health. I was a yoga teacher and advancing my studies there, and also diving into an Ayurveda program. And Abby and I were chatting, and Abby had also sort of gone down the holistic path for her own reasons, which she'll explain in a minute. And we sort of had this mind meld about how we could turn our passions and our interests in sharing this content, especially with women, into a book project. And so we sort of took off, not knowing what to expect, hoping for the best, sending all of the good vibes into the universe. And they answered back, and we were able to work with Tiller Press, which is an imprint at Simon & Schuster, which has been fabulous, and get this beautiful book into the world, even in the midst of a pandemic, which made making these recipes all that much more fun because we had to socially distance, grocery shopping, and all of these different things. And so the book is really a labor of love on many different fronts. So Abby, why don't you share a little bit about your path into this world of holistic health, and how all of this content really speaks to you?
Yeah, well, first of all, hello everybody. I'm grateful to be here and share this evening with you guys as we prepare these delicious herbal treats. But a little bit about me, as Carter had mentioned earlier, I started a website called The Butter Half already 6 years ago now, and that started out of a need to be in my kitchen, understand how to become a better cook, and documenting it along the way. And I was really into food photography. So between those two things, I thought, oh, well, I'll just make a website. And it started out as a fun hobby, turned into a career path. As Jennifer mentioned, I started Tastemaker Conference. So that's tastemakerconference.com if you're interested in the food content creation side of things. But with that, as I was learning more about food and what it can do for us, I started having some health problems and realized, you know what, I think I need to go to the doctor and get it checked out. And long story short, they told me that I have celiac disease and Hashimoto's, and those are autoimmune diseases. And it turns out that a lot of times people who have celiac disease can develop, thyroid conditions, other autoimmune diseases because of the food and the gluten that they're putting into their bodies. So I really dug into that, learned as much as I could about it, decided to go to school for herbalist certification, get my holistic nutritionist certification, and really learn about how food can be used as medicine. And I was able to use these plants, food and herbs as that type of medicine to support my body to a point where I was feeling healthy again and I could be off my medication. And as a disclaimer, we are not doctors or anything, and we do not advocate for treating or curing things, but I do want to make a point that everybody's body is so individual and different that it's 100% okay to be on medication if that is what your body needs. For me, it was something that I was able to change with food, but there are times and seasons for things, and it's not just food, right? It's a lifestyle. And so Jennifer and I advocate for that in Root and Nourish. And so as she mentioned, when we came together, we had these different paths, but ultimately they led us into this intersecting interest of, you know what, we have skill sets individually that we could bring together to put into the world to create this amazing resource for people who are also interested in using plants medicinally from a food perspective. And so that was why Root and Nourish was born. It has been a labor of love, and it is one of my most favorite projects that I've ever worked on, and that I just am really honored to be a part of with Jennifer. And because of that, we've been able to create a community around Root and Nourish. And so we now have a membership called the Root and Nourish Wisdom Circle, which is totally free of charge because we believe in the power of wellness and holistic living, and offering that to people as a resource who love it or who want to learn more about it. And so you can check that out on our website, which is rootandnourish.com, and we will talk a little bit more about that at the end. But overall, we love plants. We love what they can do. We love the symbolisms and metaphors and the literal gifts that they give us, all the things. So we can't wait to dive into that with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Abby. And you're absolutely right about this idea of food as medicine, which is one of the cornerstones of the book. And when you do get the book, if you don't have it already, you'll find that there's a really rich set of introductory material that sets the stage for the sort of terms and the way that we think about herbs and all foods, really, from a Western herbal perspective as well as from an Ayurvedic perspective. And there's this phrase in Ayurveda that if food is your medicine, then medicine is of no need, because where we're really starting from is the fact that if we have good quality food that we're eating in a mindful and compassionate way, from the environment in which you're sitting and preparing your food, but also thinking all the way back to where the food is sourced from, how it is cultivated, how it is harvested, how it's packaged, how it's processed or not processed, how it's sold, all of the steps along the way of getting our food, then that is going to give us the deepest nourishment. And when we're nourished in a regular and consistent way, with seasonal foods that are sort of keeping us in tune with our environment, then we don't get sick. Obviously, there are many other reasons why people get sick. And so this is not a foolproof plan, and no reason to think that, we can sort of control the universe in that way. But the idea behind herbalism and Ayurveda in the approach of using food as medicine is that it's sort of a preventive approach, but also a way of treating certain imbalances. In both systems, digestion is at the core of all diseases, actually. When we look at the etiology or the sort of conditions in which disease arises from an Ayurvedic perspective, it always tracks back to how strong is your digestive fire? Are you able to break down food as you're taking it in? Because essentially, if you're not breaking down food as you take it in, you don't get the nourishment from that food, or that food gets sort of like built up in your system and becomes sludge and not very good for your body overall, and can turn into lots of different things and manifest in different ways in different people depending on your constitution, which is why there are so many different ways that people can be imbalanced, even from the same cause, or have one person eat one thing and it doesn't bother them at all, and the other person, it causes lots of problems. Or within one person, sometimes it causes a problem and sometimes it doesn't. It all depends on the sort of state of your digestive fire in the context of the environment of your body. So the way we've structured this book is with digestion at the start. So there are 3 sections in the book: digestion, mental health, and female reproductive hormonal health. And all of those things definitely have their own components and their own sort of ideas behind them in terms of how herbs and spices and food can be used to support different conditions or imbalances within that sort of realm. But what we're ultimately trying to convey in the book is how interconnected all of those things are. In Western medicine, there's often this siloing that happens where if you have, digestive issues, you go to the GI doctor. If you have hormonal issues, you go to the gynecologist. If you have skin issues, you go to the dermatologist. If you have teeth issues, you go to the dentist. As you know, it goes on and on and on. And very rarely do those things overlap or communicate with each other. Those doctors very rarely have any crossover, even in the sense of like, if you go to your regular doctor and you have a specific condition, they're like, oh, like we can't help you with that. You have to go to the specialist. And so with that, it creates a lot of anxiety for people around imbalances that come up, and a lot of confusion and sort of red tape around getting care for imbalances. And Abbey, with the conditions that she described she went through, it was a very similar thing, that she was able to find this alternative through holistic medicine that sort of put it all in the same puzzle piece. Like you're putting the pieces together in terms of how things relate to one another. So all that's to say is, when you look at the book, you might go in with a certain focus. You might say, oh, this is something that's I'm working with or is bothering me, or something I'm more interested in learning about. But there's no wrong way to go about it. If you start thinking, oh, I'm working with some mental health or emotional imbalances, let me look there, and you want to make a recipe from the digestive session or the hormonal section, they're all going to support each other. And we have some narrative at the beginning of each section to sort of explain how all of those things work together. And so it can really be a choose your own adventure in terms of approaching this book. And so that's one way of sort of getting into it. But the other way is thinking more about how all of these things can work together, again, on a preventive level, how you can be mindful about what you're consuming on a day-to-day basis, by being in tune with the seasons, but also being in tune with how your body is feeling on any given day, and using foods for balance in that respect. And Abbey, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you use, or how we talk in the book about these sort of ritualistic components of our food process, our cooking process, and some of the other components in the book that support that are sort of off the table, as it were, out of the kitchen.
Yeah, so there's two parts to that. And I would say the 5 pillars of health is something we talk about in terms of a ritual of how to look at nourishment in your life beyond nutrition. So those pillars of health are nutrition, and there you can see the beautiful section on that. Nutrition, sleep and rest, movement, spirituality, and connection, because we're holistic beings, as Jennifer just mentioned, that we need all of these components to live a truly nourished and rooted life. And I think it's a beautiful way to look at that too. There are routines at the end of the book for a suggestion of how you can implement all the different rituals that we suggest in the book. Not only do we have recipes, but there are a lot of sidebar conversations about Ayurvedic rituals, self-care rituals, meditation, yoga, so that we really encompass all of those pillars of health together. And then I wanted to mention too, as Jennifer had said earlier, she is looking at this from an Ayurvedic perspective, and I bring a Western herbalism tradition to it. And there's a lot of overlap between those two schools of thought in terms of holistic health, and they beautifully go together. There's a lot of synchronicity that we tried to convey in the messaging of the book. And this is another great resource for an education in herbalism. I think having herbs, right, like in a glass jar around you, there's something very grounding and healing about that, and learning to work with these plants and use them and smell them and touch them and invoke all the senses involved with them. And so we have created an herbal apothecary and an herbal list, so for you to go through and learn about the herbs, and you can see what the different actions are and how people use herbs from a medicinal standpoint. But we teach you how to then use those through cooking, so that it's not really overwhelming, because I think sometimes that can be intimidating, and that was one of our main goals with the book too, is to make it accessible and understandable in a way that you can slowly dip your toes in, or you can dive in and go all for it. All the resources are there. So I would just say it's a great resource to learn some rituals for yourself, learn how to cook, learn all these different skill sets.
Yeah. And the last thing to mention before we dive into the food, because I'm sure you're all excited to get cooking if you're cooking along with us. So if you are doing that and you need to set up your space, get your supplies in order. On the note of sort of building your herbal apothecary, a lot of the people who we've been talking to about the book so far, and something we were really mindful of in curating the content for the book, is that some of this material can be sort of overwhelming. And when you read about all of these wonderful ingredients and the things that they can do for you, whether it's in this book or online, on blogs, on Instagram, on all these different places, it can sort of be like, oh my God, I need all these things. I need to be just like taking herbs all day long. And I definitely was in that space for a while when I started to learn about all these things. And that's not something that we want to advocate for or encourage you to do. In fact, that can be sort of counterproductive to your health if you overload on herbs, because they can be hard on your digestive system. And so if you're coming in with digestive imbalances and throwing a lot of herbs on there, it's just going to make the situation worse. And then you'll get really sad and be mad at us. And we don't want that to happen. So what we advocate for in the book is to be really curious and intuitive about how you come to herbs. You can start with things that are really basic. Probably you have a lot of them in your cabinet already, your kitchen cabinet. Things like ginger, cinnamon, chamomile, even salt and pepper are, medicinal herbs and spices. And so these are things that you can sort of test a little bit more deliberately yourself if you're used to just sort of throwing them in your food without really a lot of thought, and consider, how does this actually make me feel? Is this an herb or spice that I really enjoy the flavor of? Am I craving something or not craving something? And go with what's local first. A lot of the herbs and spices, especially from the Ayurvedic tradition, are not local to our most of us, I assume, are in the U.S., maybe even specifically in the Northeast, and so we're not getting like ashwagandha like growing in our backyards. And so what we can do instead is grow something in our backyards, like mint or basil or chamomile. Abby has some really beautiful chamomile earlier this summer, and is it still growing, Abby?
No, it's mostly wilted away and died, but I did harvest it.
But yes, so she harvested some, and there's all these beautiful herbs that are still in season right now. Even if you only have like a tiny apartment windowsill, which is what I have basically, you could still have a connection to these plants. There it is. You could have a connection to these plants that really helps to enhance the medicinal benefits of them, because you grew them, you live in the same space with them. They're having an energetic exchange with you, and so don't feel like you need to go and like buy all 50 of these herbs in the book. You don't need all of them, to be perfectly honest. So if there's ever any confusion or questions that you have, you're always welcome to reach out to us for guidance. We have a ton of educational content, not only in the book, but also on our social media and on our website, as well as places to buy the herbs that are high quality sources. The other thing to think about when building your apothecary is sourcing, because as I mentioned, not all of these herbs are native to where we live. And so we have to think about things like the environment in which they were grown, the labor that was used to harvest them, whether herbs are sort of endangered or abundant. And there's a great resource in the book, United Plant Savers, that can point you to endangered herbs. And we say this out of real reverence for the resources of the earth, which is really fundamental to everything that we're sharing in our work, because if there's something that is potentially useful for us that would be sort of like the highest, most relevant medicine, then absolutely, this is something that we should invest in and give it a try. But if this is something we're sort of like, I'm going to experiment and like see what this does to me, or I think this is cool because I saw it on Instagram, it's sort of taking advantage a little bit of the resources themselves. And we want to be respectful, and that energy is going to affect how it comes into our bodies. And so when we're considering which herbs to use or not use, we really advocate for starting small so that we're not being wasteful of these precious resources, and that they're actually being digested as best as possible by our bodies and then be transformed into all of our actions and our presence in the world. So there is this real sort of energetic recycling that's happening all the time when we're working with herbs and plants, and really anything that we come into contact with, whether it's food or people or anything like that. So that's something to just keep in the back of your head as you're experimenting with the recipes. And on that note as well, if there are things in the recipes that either you don't have or you don't like, we really encourage you to experiment and not be so rigid in your thinking about how these recipes are being made. One of our absolute dreams scenario would be for you to sort of read this book, get a lot of inspiration, and start playing in the kitchen on your own and experimenting with different combinations and flavors and ingredient mixes so that you find the perfect blend of things for you at any given time. And we would love if you share your concoctions with us if you are so inclined, but really use the kitchen as a playground and a place for discovery of yourself and this deeper connection with your plant foods. So all that's to say is try not to feel like you need to conquer herbalism or Ayurveda. Neither of us have done that after many years of study, and we have lifetimes of study ahead of us. Even people who have studied for lifetimes are still studying. And so this is really a sort of introduction and an invitation for you to take what is useful for you now and know that as you develop more interest and continue on this journey, you'll pick up more things more and more every time that you cook. You'll learn a little bit more about yourself. You'll learn a little bit more about the ingredients and come away that much more intelligent in how you can feed yourself.
I love that. And I echo that sentiment. You said it beautifully, Jennifer. So with that, should we get cooking?
We should.
All right. So I'm going to take the floor first, but first of all, I'm going to scoop my setup back so you can see what we're working with here. So we are going to be making the passionflower mocktail. So I'm grateful that Jennifer mentioned that we need to be respectful of the herbs because they can be potent and powerful. And one in particular that is potent that way is this herb called passionflower. And so passionflower is often used as a sedative, a natural sedative, and it can be pretty powerful. And so I recommend putting this in a mocktail. It's a great alcohol alternative. If you're trying to avoid that and you're wanting to relax and chill out and have a good time, this is a wonderful ingredient to include. In addition to that, we have Tulsi here, which is also known as holy basil. This is a wonderful herb. It's often used, probably most well known as an adaptogen, which is an herb that helps support stressors in our body, can also be relaxing. So the goal of this mocktail here is to do just that. And so in this passionflower mocktail, I'm going to run through the ingredients. So those are our main herb players here. And just a note about storing herbs. I purchase all of mine from Mountain Rose Herbs. As Jennifer mentioned, we advocate for making sure that we're sourcing from great places that are helpful to the environment, making sure that is forefront of mind when we do that, when we purchase. And so, excuse the noise, my family's coming in. They're going to go back outside. So anyway, we have those here, and then we make that into a decoction, which I will show you in a little bit. But I want to run through the rest of these. We are including some tart cherries, which this is a great use for sleeping, in addition to passionflower, which a lot of people sometimes use naturally in terms of for a natural sleep aid. Passionflower can do that for its sedative qualities. But red tart cherries, they've done some studies for people drinking red tart cherry juice. I remember I read that years ago to help them get into sleep cycles. And so this is a great combination that adds a nice little flavor in there. And then we have some herbal bitters, which we also have in the cookbook. You can learn how to make your own with something as simple as like a apple cider vinegar base. So it's an opportunity to use the fun glass in your kitchen. That's one of my favorite things too about the apothecary feel is you just get to have these wonderful little glass vials. It feels a little fun and witchy. We have local honey, I try to buy mine from local farmers markets. And then we have some vanilla extract. We also have a recipe for that in the book. And then we have a little bit of ice that we're going to use, and then a little bit of salt to put on the rim there. So I have some questions coming in here. Allie, do your kids enjoy these recipes as well? They do for the most part. The pudding that Jennifer is going to be making, the chocolate pudding, they tasted, did I say that correctly, when we were shooting the cookbook here at my house, and they loved it. So, you know, there are a few things that they're a little picky about. Don't mind the dog running around in the background. But yeah, it depends on the recipe. But these ones, they usually like the drinks, they like the pudding, so it's hit or miss with them. But I try to teach them how to implement nutrition into their life, because I think that's an important thing that we can learn from a young age, and teaching them to respect the earth and the plants and all the things. So trying to pass that knowledge on to my kids. So anyway,
I never thought though, Abby, about mocktails for a kid. Like,
yeah,
that's a great idea.
I guess they can, right? Yeah,
right?
It could be like a fun little tradition for them if they want to learn how to make a fancy drink.
Yeah, maybe with some like sparkling water or something.
Yeah, that could be a fun thing, because I make some fun like sparkling drinks with other herbs like rose powder and whatnot. So that could be a fun little addition there. So for this, in terms of the ingredients that you use, we use a blender. You need a shaker. I am multi-purposing my Yeti. I realized I can use this as a drink mixer and a shaker, and it works perfectly. And then we need a sieve to strain the herbs out of the decoction that I made, and just, I think that's pretty much it. Then some salt, a bowl full of water and some salt to put the rim on your glass here. So it's pretty simple and straightforward. So I've already made this decoction. I use 3 cups of water and 2 tablespoons of each herb of the Tulsi and the passionflower. And so that's what's cooking over here. So first in the book, you will want to make that decoction. So that's all done. And then we're going to move on to the cherry puree part. So this is really simple. I got these red tart cherries. You can get them from the grocery store. If you have them fresh on hand, that's wonderful too. I just don't know where, depending on your local you pick situation, if you have cherries available. You could also, honestly, you could get creative. If you don't want to use red tart cherries, you could use some other type of stone fruit that would be great. And these are already pitted, so we're going to do half a cup of that. And I like to add the juice in there.
Abby, would you say if you're using fresh cherries, would you sort of boil them down, cook them down a little bit before, or would you use them straight up fresh?
You know, you want to make sure, first of all, make sure they're pitted. You probably could to just help them be a little softer. Honestly, I've generally used this, and then the fresh ones, they are soft enough, but it also depends. Like if you're using the red tart cherries, they're pretty soft, but if you end up saying like, hey, I don't want to use those and I only have a different type of cherry on hand, those can be a little more firm. So you can easily cook them down a little bit, just in like a cup of hot water and in a small saucepan like I have over there, and just simmer until they're softened, and then add it to the blender. So we have that here. We have our cherries. Then we are going to, I have my book here, our vanilla extract. Make sure I'm going in the correct order. So this is a really easy thing you can make at home that a lot of times is a lot cheaper to do if you make your own vanilla extract, just because vanilla prices are still pretty high. I think they're finally starting to go down, but I think homemade extract tastes a lot better too. And it's a fun gift to make for people. So we're just going to add that in. At this point, we are going to puree it so that everything is nice and smooth. So it might get a little loud. Plug your ears. Okay, so I pureed that in my blender here. I have a Vitamix that you can use any sort of blender for about 30 seconds, and it'll give you. And then next is when we are going to shake all the things together. So I am going to add the puree. And that smells really good with the vanilla. It's a cherry vanilla smell, which I think that's one of the greatest smells on the planet. Now I'm going to strain in my tea mix. And so you want to make sure that this is cool because this is a cool type of drink with ice. And if it's hot, you are going to melt your ice and it's going to take a while to cool down. So it's just easier on all fronts. So you're going to strain it. I have the sieve on top and I'm just going to pour it over. There we go. And you can add a little bit of ice. And start getting that cooled. Hey, doggy. And then we are going to add in our bitters here. So you can buy these little glass vials, or if you have a local apothecary or online, your favorite little shop, a lot of times they will make bitters like this and with these cool little glass dropper bottles. So I'm going to add in just a few drops. In the book, it has very specific measurements for these, but with drinks and really anytime you're cooking with herbs, it is an intuitive process, as Jennifer had mentioned earlier. So if you like more of that bitter flavor, add more of those in there. If you want more honey and you like it sweeter, add more. If you want more cherries, add more. It's pretty simple and straightforward. So I like to add a little bit more honey than what is recommended in the book, just because I like things a little sweeter. So this is my local honey, and I saw that some of you said you love local honey. Me too. It's one of my joys in life. So we added probably about a tablespoon of that. And then we are going to shake everything together. Whoa, that honey is like very thick and strong. Okay, so now this is the fun part. Before I put the ice in my glass, I'm going to rim it with salt. So get a little bowl of water and dip it in there. And then I have some chunky sea salt on this plate here. And I'm just going to twist it in like that so that I have a nice salt rim. Because the salt actually makes the tartness of this drink. You have the sweet, the tart, and the salty. And in my opinion, that is like the perfect culinary recipe in terms of, you know, awakening your flavor sensations. And then I'm just going to get a little bit of ice and gently put it in there as to not disturb your salt rim. And then you can pour it in. Look at me with my cocktail skills. There we go. And then if you want, you can add in a few more cherries if you're into that as a little garnish. If you want to make it fun and pretty, add it on top. And you know what, I'm going to fill this up a little bit more. And this is a good time for me to be drinking this drink because it's almost 8 o'clock. And by the time this hits in my system, it'll be time for me to go to bed. I'm just going to add a few more cherries in there. And look at that color. It's like a really beautiful, rich color.
So good.
So good. And the flavor of this, it's not too sweet. It's not bitter. It's not too tart. It's a pretty mild taste. And again, if you prefer to have it more bitter or you want to add more of that sweet flavoring, go ahead and adjust things, play with the recipes. But it's pretty straightforward. And now I get to sit back and relax, let the sedatives kick in, power of the plants and the herbs. And so I hope this just shows you that cooking with herbs can be fun and simple and creative. I think it's a really great way to flex your creativity and be innovative that way, because I think it's really good for our health when we try new things and do novel tasks in the kitchen and using our hands. So there you go. Jennifer, now we get to see your mint avocado chocolate pudding.
Yes. Hi, everybody. So welcome to my kitchen. What I do want to say one thing just about Abbey's beautiful drink. What I think is so special about that is two things. One is, you know, you mentioned that this is like a great drink to have before going to bed, which is such an interesting way of thinking about, you know, we usually think of like hot tea as our bedtime herbal concoction, and you could have a cool drink, you know, which is great for summer. And using this as a way to sort of introduce herbs even to your friends and your family, if you're having a barbecue or some kind of outdoor party or any type of gathering where perhaps you might traditionally have an alcoholic beverage, which really wouldn't support sleep in the same kind of way, you know, continuous sleep in the same kind of way. And so this is a great way to showcase the power of herbs and the deliciousness of herbs, even in social situations. So this is another way of experiencing delicious herbs in this mint avocado cacao pudding. And this was one of the, as Abby mentioned, kid approved recipes. So great to enjoy with your kiddos. And there's really not that many ingredients. And it again proves that you can make something really delicious and indulgent tasting that doesn't compromise your time or your sense of feeling healthy and vibrant in your body. This is one of those things that, you know, when you make it, it doesn't really, it's surprising to people that it's not a more traditional kind of pudding. And it's also great for whipping up when you need a little bit of a lift or you need something that feels really grounding and nourishing to your spirit. This is in the mental health section of the book, where we talk a lot about things that are either going to like raise your energy or sort of bring you down from anxiety or from restlessness or overwork. And so both of the recipes, I think, are more of the like bringing you down sort of vibe. But at the same time, they're really supportive. They're not going to like knock you out in that way or numb you out. They're going to make you more present to the tastes and to the textures of your food, which will be supportive of your mental health overall, bringing you more into the present, and also great for sharing, because one of the things that we really wanted to focus on in this book is how food can bring people together, which is, you know, as we all know, after the year we've been through, is super important to our mental health. So on that note, let's get started with the pudding. So we're going to start with some dates. And this is a jar of soaked dates. And this is one of the like staples of our kitchen. I'm just going to adjust my screen so you can see my head a little bit better. This is one of the staples of our herbal kitchen, where we use these Medjool dates, which are the sort of bigger dry dates. They have a little bit more juice to them, a little bit more softness. Really delicious snack if you're someone who has a sweet tooth and looking for a natural alternative. These are delicious. And when you just put them in a jar, I like to cut them in half to remove the pit and then make quarters out of them. Put them in a jar, top it with some boiling water, and then just let it cool and keep it in the fridge. You can have these dates then as a snack anytime, or to use in these sort of recipes, whether it's the pudding or we use it in many recipes actually throughout the book. So this is a great thing to sort of have as part of your staples, in addition to like things like grains and beans and nuts. And so we're going to use a bunch of these dates, just about a cup. So we'll pour them in here, and I'm not going to use too much of the liquid just because they are pretty soft, and you want the pudding to have some texture to it. So you don't want it to be completely liquefied. And dates in Ayurveda are actually a very highly regarded food. They're one of these foods that has a sort of divine aspect to them. They are extremely nourishing to the body and to the mind. We have a little section in the book about Ayurvedic psychology, and there's this concept called sattva, or this state of mind called sattva, that is basically the sort of ideal middle ground of your mental state, where you're sort of clear-headed and peaceful and harmonious with the world. And dates are sort of the embodiment of sattva. And so when you eat a date, it has this sort of incredible softening, deeply nourishing quality to it. So having dates as your sweetener here is going to not only bring a lot of natural sweetness, so you don't need to use sugar, but it's going to bring all of those qualities as well. So next we have avocados, which are similar, have a similar quality actually, because of their, you know, rich source of fat. And probably most of you are experts at avocados at this point, but as a pro tip, if you are using avocados, all you want to do is, you know, scoop out the seed. When you slice it in half, you sort of jab your knife into the seed and spit it out. And then I like to make these little like cross hatch marks with my knife, which make it really easy to scoop out. So we're going to use 2 avocados here in our pudding. And similar to what Abby was saying about the proportions, you know, sometimes avocados are bigger or smaller than other times. And so you can sort of play around if you feel like when you're making this pudding, like you need a little bit more creaminess or a little bit more sweetness. So you can adjust that depending on your ingredients. And that's part of the sort of wisdom and the fun of cooking this way, is that it really requires your attention to the process, and it helps you to get more in tune with, okay, like this ingredient has these qualities today, rather than, you know, this is always, you know, I'm always going to use 2 exact avocados. Maybe today you only need 1.5, or if your avocado is not super ripe, you notice that it's not super ripe, and so I'm not going to use it today. But that sort of mindfulness and attention to the ingredients is one of the things that we're just sort of hoping that people come away with. So we're going to blend this up first. So audio check. I just like to blend it to sort of medium consistency. You don't have to get it. Yes.
Do you have any recommendations for, you know, the appliances that people would need to make this sort of consistency, to make this type of pudding?
Sure.
Would a blender work, or do you need a food processor?
I'm using a food processor because that's what I have, but I think a blender would absolutely work fine, especially if you're using a Vitamix, because a Vitamix has sort of like every capacity. I have tried doing this with an immersion blender in like a big bowl, and I would say that I don't recommend that, just because it's hard to like get everything together, whereas this is a little bit more it just sort of like flows in and of itself, and you don't need to worry too much about mixing it in or like getting everything in pieces. And so I like to use the blender and part of the food processor or a blender. And one of the things to note about the sequence of the ingredients is putting the mushy stuff in first, and then the powders and other ingredients on top will sort of lay the groundwork for the consistency, so that you don't have a lot of like random loose powder stuck on the bottom. So just note that in terms of the sequence and how you're making it. So as I just put in some cacao powder, and cacao powder is not the same as cocoa. So cacao is the raw, the fruit of the cacao bean that gets fermented actually, and sort of cultivated in that way to get turned into eventually into chocolate. But cacao is the more sort of raw, unprocessed form of that before you get to chocolate. And cacao is an incredible sort of superfood that a lot of us have been discovering a little bit more recently, with the rise of superfoods and all that. And what's interesting about cacao is that for some folks, it is a little bit more of a stimulant. So people will say that if they have some sort of cacao drink at night, it keeps them awake. For other people, it doesn't do that. Like for me, it doesn't do that. And so I like to have cacao at night or this chocolate pudding at night, and it doesn't bother me at all. So that's something too you have to think about for your own body. Is this something that is going to, how is it going to affect my body? And so the cacao is one of those, it's sort of an adaptogen in that regard. And that's why we have that in this section of the book, in the mental health section. So we have our cacao powder. We also have some unsweetened coconut flakes. So you could add those in. And last but not least, we have our mint, which is beautiful fresh mint. Mint is the one thing that Abby's kids did not approve of, because when we put this in the pudding, in this, you know, as the mint leaves, it doesn't break down completely. And so if you're somebody who is really like strongly in favor of like super smooth pudding, we advise in the book to leave out the mint leaves in the pudding. And if you want that minty flavor, you could add some mint extract. or just put the mint leaves as garnish on top. So just know that for yourself, depending on the texture that you like. I'm going to use, the book recommends about 2 tablespoons, but I'm just going to sort of eyeball it for the reasons that Abby mentioned. And I also like a little bit of a stronger mint flavor. So I'm going to add that in. And then we're going to do another blend. Coffee. All right, so we'll take a look inside, and I'm just going to use a little rubber scraper to make sure all the cacao is incorporated. But as you can sort of see, maybe you could see my food processor, the cacao didn't like sort of spread all over the place and get sort of wild, which is good news, and part of the reason for that layering that we talked about in terms of the process. So here we are. I'm going to scoop some into a bowl just so that you can see the finished product. And in the book, we also talk about some potential garnishes. So we have a beautiful recipe for a whipped cream that's made with a marshmallow root decoction. And that's an incredible way to top this recipe. If you have other sorts of whipped cream that you like, other non-dairy whipped cream, just because we are talking plant-based, or regular whipped cream if you eat dairy, that's a great alternative. We also really love cashew cream, which is a very simple way of making a sort of creamy, all-purpose, multi-purpose additive, so that when you are making things like this, you can use it as a sweet topping or a savory topping. I'm topping my pudding right now with some cacao nibs, which are, an alternative to chocolate chips. You could also use regular old chocolate chips, but these have a little bit more of a bitter taste, and I'm just adding a little bit more of our fresh mint. So I'm going to go ahead and have a little taste. You can see how it came out.
A nice addition too, if you want a little bit of that in there.
Delicious.
That looks so good.
This will be my evening snack. Very pleased. And again, as you saw, super easy. So you can this makes a pretty generous amount. So it'll serve maybe 4 or 5 people. But, you could sort of adjust the proportions if you're just wanting like 1 serving. But why would you want just 1 serving? Like, this is basically like healthy. You could eat it for breakfast. So make as much as you want and have it as something that's on hand. And then that you can sort of give yourself this kind of snack that's dates and avocados, and it's like superfood yummy. So it's one of these all-purpose desserts that can make you feel really good any time of day. So that's our pudding, our mocktail. You are all set for a very delicious Thursday evening.
So we now want to spend the last few minutes. Looks like we have 7 minutes here for any Q&A. Are there any questions? I know there were a few coming through about getting bottles for Mountain Rose Herbs, and Jennifer had mentioned that you can get those there.
Hi, I'm back.
Hi, Carter.
Hey there. So Allie did ask, do you have any herbal staples to help someone start?
Herbal staples to help someone start. So Jennifer touched, I'll take this question if you don't mind. Jennifer mentioned in the middle there about how you don't need to start with all the things. I recommend picking 1 to 3 herbs that call to you. And so a way I would recommend doing that, using the book as the resource, is flip through it, look through the herbal actions lists, different type of body systems that support and get in tune with what you need. And then you'll start noticing a trend. And I have had this conversation with a lot of other herbalists and herb enthusiasts, that there is usually your herb that will stick out to you. And I think that's intuitively calling to you. And so start with that. Even if it's just 1, I think 1's a great place to start. If there's up to 3, I think that's fine too, because a lot of these have multiple actions. It's not just like they target one part of the body. That's what's beautiful about plant medicine, is that it intuitively knows your body as well and will provide you the balance and support that you need.
Yeah. Great. Do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to go into that. But another way, sort of like a complementary way, is to just look for recipes that you like. Which recipes call out to you, even if, again, if it's not something that's like in the section that you're working on in particular, but which recipes are like, wow, that looks really good, I want to make it. And then just get the ingredients for that recipe. And then you'll have those ingredients for at least a little while. And you can sort of start to incorporate them in other things. And it's fun to sort of taste your herbs and spices in their original form. So not just sort of incorporating them into a dish, which is an excellent way, but as Abby mentioned, the herbs and spices all have very complex profiles and personalities, as it were. So they will interact with each other when you're cooking, especially like just the act of cooking them will change the nature of these plants. And so if you're sort of tasting in your kitchen, the powders, the leaves, even things like, having your teas and really just tasting the tea without adding anything like honey or milk or lemon or things like that, that's in and of itself a real education in how your body is going to respond to something. Because very often in our society, things are covered up with so many additives or stimulants or extras in order to make them appealing. Even something, like the two recipes we made tonight, a mocktail or even a cocktail at a restaurant or a bar might have a ton of like syrup or, other sorts of flavor add-ins that are not natural. They're trying to mimic a natural taste, but they're not the natural taste. And so you might find that, wow, this mocktail that I made from actual cherries and other herbal ingredients doesn't taste the way that I am used to things tasting. And having your taste evolve over time is one of the like most exciting things. I have watched that myself. My taste profile change over time, which has been a real education, and noticing how that taste profile even changes throughout the year during the seasons, or when I'm imbalanced in certain kinds of ways, where it's like, oh, this thing that I used to love to eat all the time, I just like don't want anymore, or it's making me feel bad. And then if you continue to eat it, it's like, that's something to think about. Am I just eating it for a routine because this is what someone told me is good, or what used to work for me before, or can I adjust and evolve with who I am right now? And that's sort of a deeper question that you can reflect on, whether it's with food or other things in your life. Is this thing suiting me anymore? If you're getting really strong signals from your body that you don't like it. So that's how we can sort of take the lessons of this book and project them larger into the rest of our lives, which is, it can be a sort of big concept, but one of the things that both of us have found is that using food in this way to help clarify some of these basic things about, like, am I hungry? What kind of food do I want to eat? Am I full? Does this food taste good? Basic things that we sometimes don't think about at all because we're too distracted while we're eating can really have a lot of layered meanings in other areas of our life. And once we get those skills down pat in the kitchen and at the table when we're eating, we can start to see them appearing in other places and make better decisions about our work, our relationships, where we live, what things we're buying. So there's really a big significant ripple effect with just a few herbs.
Wow. Yeah. Really speaks to your book. So our last question, probably rapid fire so that we have a little bit of time to wrap up. But Casey asks, what are your favorite recipes to make in the summer? And do you have anything for migraines?
My favorite thing is we have a watermelon blueberry salad, and it's just a delightful combination of fruits and a lot of nourishing watery fruits that in the summertime when it's really hot outside, it's just a delight. And I think Jennifer is going to turn to it so you can see which page it's on. You can make it.
Yes.
In terms of migraines, there isn't a particular herb that we talk about in the book because we don't necessarily speak to that within the book. There are a few herbs that can support that, but I would just say a lot of times that is something you can turn to your digestion, and there's the beautiful picture of that salad.
That looks good.
And really be looking into, you know, the environmental factors of why the migraines are happening. I think that's a great place to start and look at, you know, lifestyle factors or stress levels. A lot of times can impact that too. Jennifer, if you want to add anything to that.
Yes, my favorite summertime recipe is this beet fennel chickpea salad, which is super easy to make and uses really lovely cooling vegetables and herbs. There's a lot of fresh dill, there's fennel, beets, and a really light sort of vinegar mustard dressing. And to the point of migraines, migraines can come from like many different sources. And so there isn't one particular remedy for migraines. A sort of Ayurvedic tip that works for a lot of people that I know, including myself, is if you're having a migraine, you put a ice pack on your head and a hot water bottle on your feet. And it sounds sort of ridiculous, but the idea is that you're constricting the blood vessels in your head and causing all of the blood to go down and out into your feet. And the blood vessels in your feet will be dilated because of the heat. So that sort of brings the tension out of your head. And it's a little bit contradictory because often we think about, you know, that constriction of the head with the ice would make the migraine worse, but it sort of works. So it's not really an herbal remedy. I think like water. I get migraines, and water is actually the best thing for it, and sleep, which goes back to the 5 pillars of health. You know, just go to sleep.
And that's what I'm going to do right after this.
Just go to sleep.
All right. So to wrap up, where can everyone find you on social media, on the internet? What else you want to be found on? Things like that.
Yeah, well, we have an Instagram handle for the book at Root and Nourish Book. We each have our own Instagram handles as well. I'm at Jennifer Kurdyla, and Abbey is at @thebutterhalf_. And we also have a website for the book, rootandnourish.com, where you can find all of the resources that we mentioned for buying herbs. You can buy the book and also join the Wisdom Circle that Abbey mentioned, our free online gathering space, where we have a lot of fun conversations and events as well. So we'd love to see you there.
Great. Thank you both so much. And for everyone watching, you can buy that book right down there in that link down there. The book is beautiful, as you can see over there. And then we also have a bunch of events coming up for next month. We actually have Astoria Bookshop's 8th birthday next month. So that's pretty exciting. And we have a bunch of events for that. So we will see you at our next event. And thank you both so, so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.